this train crashed into another train after its brakes had failed and ended the lives of 56 people and leaving 56 injured. This is the story of the Gare de Lyon train collision. On the 27th of June 1998, SNCF commuter train 153944 eastbound from Paris Gare de Lyon terminal from Moulin from the east side running on its route 80-kilometer journey from one of NSCF's electric multiple unit class Z behind it as the train neared Paris. It passed the Le Viet Machin station, which is already stopped en route. However, SNCF had recently reported a new summer train turntable, which is being the train 1533944 no longer stopped at the station. The train pulled past the platform. The passenger's signal was suddenly stood. Suddenly, a passenger in the second car of the train suddenly stood and pulled the emergency brakes and left the train driver Daniel Sulin stood by guard Jules Bolivian. After working for 26 minutes, reset the brakes and confirmed this and continued. This produced had take longer than usual. More passengers had to leave the train to make up for lost time. The station controller at Gare de Lyon, Alan Torrance, instructed Sulin to skip to the next scheduled stop, and that's both the Muslim Elephant. After the train was about, it reached for the Great Regards Gare de Lyon, and Subai passed the yellow signal, instructed him to slow the train as it switched picked up speed. At the time, someone apparently radioed an emergency warning to identify the train picked up speed, but failed to identify himself as a controller. He went to the general pump station radio and left his cab to activate the passenger radio of the train. Suddenly, the driver saw, and then it happened. Train 153944 crashed into a delayed outbound train, which was evacuated its passengers. The outbound train was suddenly guy bravely removed his cabin. A repair warning the train outcome numerous times until he was killed in the collision. In the end, 56 people died and only 57 were injured. But how could this accident really happen? Initial reports about the collision was a result of a terrorist act due to ransomware bombing French trains at around Paris. The serious results of the fact that investigators who examined the wreckage of a train 153944 found that the main brake pipe valve was located behind the first car closed when they opened the load valve air generator for the first back through the upper car's power to power the compressed air brake. When closed, the brakes on all cars behind the valve are disabled. Despite the signs of terrorism, investigation believes that only someone with detailed knowledge of the braking system working could have closed the valve. Next, however, pulled the emergency brakes. Investigators ruled the person was unknown. When a newspaper printed advertising for the brake puller to come forward, a young mother, Ollie Mara, came forward. She told investigators that she normally used the train's chains. Use train 153944 stop at Gare de Lyon station to pick up her children from school. However, she was unaware that the new train would not stop at Gare de Lyon, not keeping her to. She pulled the emergency brakes and left the train. She was fined 100 for her actions, and thank God she saved her life. The investigators then turned to the older view, with Sudan looking at the record more closely than before. After the brake was pulled, Sudan went to the rear of the car to pull the handle, but the handle was sluggish and refused to move. He had been overlooked previously, and he discovered Sudan had placed his hand on the main pipe valve to get more images to pull his handle. When Sudan finally pulled the handle, he must get someone he must also accidentally close the valve. However, this conclusion raised up questions as to how Sudan managed to get the train moving again. A fail-safe mechanism and the car locked with the brakes on the position if the valve was closed. The only way to start the train again was to reopen the valve and manually lock each brake. SNCF was only glad for his engineer for an engineer to examine the train, who could have probably found the close valve. However, Suno anxious to continue the trip, instead of help to provide to work along opposite sides of the train, unlocking each brake. Sudan believed the cause of the problem was coming as known as an airlock. When the emergency brakes was activated, an airlock was altered by the air pressure of filling up the air pipes, clogging and preventing the brakes from working. The brakes walk up apart a safe line mechanism when the airlocks occurred. To fix the problem, the trapped air must be let out of the pipe and release the brakes. So with an essence to believe, he went and manually bent what little air was left out of each brake of the carriage's nervousness. Sudan had no idea what he could have done, and started the passenger pressure gauge in his cab, marking the correct pressure that he when he threw all the emergency braking system working order. It is unknown to him. He had closed the main valve, making the first carriage from the rest of the train. He had faced the brake haze around the safe mechanism and the valve closed. There was no way air come out of the system, thus only slowed the pressure from the first car brakes. Even with only one strength required braking power, it was still operated to slow the train down. First, there was more stations, and was Alfred before Gare de Lyon, which are given that there are plenty of more time to slow down the top of it. However, to avoid throwing over trains at the Gare de Lyon station or schedule, the controller ordered the driver to pass to Mountains Otford. He proceeded quickly to Gare de Lyon. A second, the train was equipped with electric dynamic braking systems. According to the drivers were using dynamic brakes because they were unable to skid wheels and using conjunctions with the air brakes in any cases. So they probably had completely forgotten about it as a result of his panic. Even the stage were two more opposite to get the train to stop. Driver Sutton managed to go warning and activate his emergency alarm to signal his train was in trouble. But he identified himself for his positions of the controller and left the cab before anyone could call him back. The driver knew the runaway was one of 4 trains due to arrive at the station. They combined messaged all the down possibilities. They could rule out such trains as not in trouble. They would have been identified the train was in trouble and get over by platform 1. However, when it didn't push the emergency alarm, it focused all the trains and network stop. However, they were in way towards the structures. It was resulting steam calls from Waylad. Drivers required about the stoppage clogged the communication lines between the control room and the trains. As a result, the controller would never identify to identify the runaway train. Finally, the signalers had also programmed the tracks so that the runaway train will be diverted into platform 1, which is empty instead of platform 2. When the delayed train was crashing into the empty platform right of the wreckage of the train, but the passengers avoided but when Daniel Sudan directed by the alarm, he said all circuits pretending called the general close procedure. This stopped all trains along the line and heading towards Gracefully out. However, in order to get that signal to all my country's network, this proceed all were programmed routes allowed the runaway train to go back to platform instead of platform 1. The collision was unavoidable. The runaway train driver, Daniel Sedone, was released after serving 6 months of 4 years manslaughter. Sentenced Charles being bothered, the runaway guard was also sentenced to someone local. Proceedings began the Gare de Lyon supervisors, ornithorians who failed to activate the station are mere but unsuccessful. And SFCF Union reportedly claimed the Swindon was scapegoated. Critics of SNCF blamed the accident on the overweight tires due to lack of the station space and railway management. The accident was featured on season 2 of National Geographic Channel second series of disaster, and the program Paris Train Crash, also known as Runaway Train. The accident was also featured on the UK documentary for disaster episode Trains.